Hello and welcome to Weekly News Highlights. Let's begin with key words that made headlines this week. President Lee Jae-myung held his first formal press conference this week, marking his first 30 days in office, addressing a wide range of issues including the economy, politics, diplomacy, and security. As the July 9 tariff deadline set by U.S. President Donald Trump approaches, countries including South Korea brace for a critical tariff hit. The Korean government hosted a public hearing this week to address the issue, and eyes are now on whether the Korean government will be able to strike a trade deal. A heat wave has swept across much of South Korea, with most regions experiencing daytime temperatures of over 30 degrees Celsius and tropical nights throughout the week. President Lee Jae-myung held a press conference on Thursday as he marked 1 month in office. When it comes to trade talks with the U.S., the president said it's not easy, though he says he's making utmost efforts. Our senior presidential office correspondent Yoon Jung-min has this report.
South Korean President Lee Jae-myung was mindful of trade negotiations with the U.S. during Thursday's press conference, marking 30 days in office. When asked, he said one thing that he could say for sure was that it's not easy.
지금 그렇다고 해서 7월 8일까지 끝낼 수 있는지도 확언하기 어려워요. 지금 최선을 다하고 있습니다. 최선을 다하고 있고 또 쌍방의 모두에게 도움이 되는 그야말로 호혜적인 그런 결과를 만들어내야 하는데 아직까지도 쌍방이 정확하게 뭘 원하는지가 명확하게 정리되지는 못한 상태입니다.
This as the deadline for talks to cut the 25% reciprocal tariffs imposed by the Trump administration is less than a week away. He went on to say that his government is looking for topics in many different fields as he revisited his principle of pragmatic diplomacy for national interests. On North Korea, the commander-in-chief vowed to improve relations with Pyongyang based on the South Korea-U.S. alliance, as well as the three-way cooperation with Japan, urging the importance of dialogue and communication.
대화를 전면 단절하는 건 그건 정말 바보짓이죠. 미워도 얘기를 들어야 되거든요. 그리고 협상하고 정치나 외교에서는 감정을 배제해야 된다.
He added that North Korea's response was quick and better than he had expected to South Korea halting loudspeaker broadcasts 1 week after Lee took office in June. On South Korea's relationship with Japan,
이런 갈등 요소도 있긴 합니다만 저는 이 두 가지를 뒤섞을 필요는 없다고 생각해요. 그 문제는 그 문제대로. 말씀드렸던 것처럼 전쟁 중에도 외교는 한다, 대화는 한다, 협력할 건 한다.
He was referring to long-standing controversies between the two neighbors, stemming from Japan's colonization of the Korean peninsula from 1910 to 1945, as well as territorial issues. Still, he says he sees a lot of areas to work together with Tokyo, including tackling North Korea's nuclear and missile programs, on top of the economic cooperation. President Lee, who's just 1 month in office, did not forget to mention his recent visit to the G7 summit, which he called an official announcement signaling Korea's return to global summit diplomacy. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
And also at the press conference, President Lee laid out his vision for major domestic issues, focusing on improving livelihoods and prompting unity. Our top office correspondent Song Yu-jin reports.
Helping people get back on their feet will continue to be South Korean President Lee Jae-myung's #1 priority. Even on day one, President Lee issued his first executive order to establish an emergency economic task force. The supplementary budget proposal, worth 30.5 trillion won, or roughly $22.4 billion is also part of those efforts. When asked about the impact of the universal cash handouts, President Lee said they'll act as a priming pump for the economy.
소비 진작 더하기, 소득 지원 효과도 있죠. 이 서민들이 너무 먹고 살기 어렵잖아요. 당장 떼거리가 불안한 사람한테 15만 원은 아니 50만 원은 정말 엄청나게 큰 돈이죠. 효과는 일반적으로 평가되는 것보다 높을 거다라고 생각합니다.
Another area of focus was balanced development between the capital region and the rest of the country, which the president says is essential to Korea's long-term growth.
제가 국무회의에서 이런 지시를 해놨어요. 아예 정부가 정책을 결정하거나 또는 예산을 배정하거나 할 때 지역별로 일종의 가중치 표를 만들어 달라. 예를 들면 수도권에서의 거리 아니면 지방 대도시에서의 거리.
Other growth drivers highlighted by the president included investment in AI, semiconductors, and renewable energy. He also pledged to pave the way for the Kospi to reach 5,000 by making the capital market fairer and more reliable. On housing, following the recent tightening of housing loan regulations, he signaled that additional real estate measures are on the way, combining expanded supply with demand controls to stabilize prices. Communication and unity were also recurring themes, especially across political lines. President Lee described differing views as an uncomfortable but necessary source of synergy.
대한민국 전체를 대표하는 대통령의 직무를 수행하기 때문에 실제로 우리 국민들이 하나로 모일 수 있는 통합의 국정을 해야 합니다. 그리고 마음에 드는 또는 색깔이 같은 쪽만 쭉 쓰면은 위험하죠.
That comment appears to address criticism surrounding his decision to retain Agriculture Minister Song Mi-ryong and appoint another prosecutor-turned-senior secretary for civil affairs who lead the prosecution reform. Regarding cooperation with the opposition, the president said he is open to meeting frequently and as needed. Thursday's press conference itself, held under the themes of closer, broader, and new, reflected Lee's commitment to engagement. It invited not only the presidential press corps and foreign correspondents, but also grassroots media outlets. Reporters sat close to the president without a podium.
And President Lee didn't forget the public, promising they'll remain at the center of policymaking. He said he will listen to what they have to say through direct channels, such as the recently launched People's Mailbox, and town hall-style gatherings, such as the one in Gwangju last week. 송유진, Arirang News.
It's been 1 month since President Lee Jae-myung took office. It's still early days, but we review the past 30-something days of his foreign affairs and security policies, which he has defined as pragmatic diplomacy. For more on this, we have our Oh Soo-young in the studio with us. Welcome, Soo-young.
It's great to be here.
So, Soo-young, how would you summarize the first month of Lee's pragmatic diplomacy?
Well, indeed, from my perspective, there's been quite an interesting mix of both continuity and change from the previous Yoon Suk-yeol government. In being pragmatic, the Lee Jae-myung administration is clearly keeping Seoul's global diplomacy intact, based on the president's first multilateral summit at the G7. Now, holding at least 10 individual summits with world leaders, his focus there was to reinforce South Korea's position in the international community as a vibrant democratic partner after 6 months of leadership vacuum following former President Yoon Suk-yeol's martial law decree last year. Now, there's continuity in South Korea's strategic relationships too. Lee's first phone calls with world leaders were made in the order of the US, Japan, and then China. Now, that mirrors the previous Yoon administration's priorities, emphasizing the South Korea-US alliance and a future-oriented partnership with Tokyo. Now, that's been surprising, given how past progressive leaders have tended to show more affinity towards China than Japan, emphasizing historical disputes with the latter. However, there has been some recalibration when it comes to working with China and Russia. The former Yoon administration endorsed liberal democratic values as the basis for cooperation, but the new Lee government has indicated it will focus on what serves Korean interests, not necessarily values.
The Yoon government's value diplomacy used values as the standard for all foreign policy decisions. As a result, relations between Seoul and its neighbors, especially China, Russia, and North Korea, rapidly deteriorated. This directly affected Korea's economic and security situation. Thus, the need for pragmatic diplomacy emerged from understanding that value diplomacy alone could not guarantee peace, development, or stability on the Korean peninsula.
On North Korea, Yi's strategy is clearly geared towards lowering tensions. Even in the first month of his presidency, he decided to withhold psychological warfare tactics like loudspeaker broadcasts, while cracking down on South Korean groups sending anti-North Korea flyers across the border. Now, that's a sharp contrast to the tit-for-tat escalation under the former Yoon administration.
And what does his selection of ministers for diplomacy and security tell us about his pragmatic diplomacy?
Well, I would say that President Yi's cabinet picks really represent a decisive pivot towards multilateral cooperation and peace rather than deterrence towards North Korea. Foreign Minister nominee Cho Hyun is a career diplomat with decades of experience in multilateral diplomacy. He's emphasized the importance of diversifying Korea's diplomatic interests, and speaking during a doorstepping interview, Cho said it was time to move beyond what he called the stereotype that diplomacy begins and ends with the United States. Now, at the same time, though, he did acknowledge America's centrality in building peace with North Korea. The nominee for Unification Minister Chung Dong-young is also no stranger to the inter-Korean agenda. He's held the same position under the Nomuyon administration and played a central role in organizing the 2007 Inter-Korean Summit. Now, he said that he supports the US-North Korea talks, noting that they will help ease tensions on the Korean peninsula and contribute to peace and stability. The appointment of Ang Kyu-baek as defense minister is also noteworthy, I would say. He'll be the first civilian to hold the post in more than 6 decades, representing democratic oversight of the military, particularly after the martial law crisis last year. Now, rather than a strong alliance-based message, An also emphasized the need for a peaceful overture between the South and North, such as the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, to create the kind of mood for military tensions to be eased.
And is the Korea-US summit still expected in late July, and what are the stakes?
Well, until earlier in the week, officials from both governments confirmed that a Trump meeting in Washington is being arranged, likely set for around July 21st. But over the past few days, there's been some uncertainty after Secretary of State Marco Rubio's 2-day visit mid-month was cancelled. Now, his visit presumably would have finalised crucial details ahead of the bilateral summit. And amid speculation that Rubio will have to prioritise the US leaders' summit with his Israeli counterpart first, the Foreign Ministry said that there was sufficient explanation for America's cancellation and that the two sides are still communicating closely to make sure that the leaders' summit happens. Now, the clock is ticking ahead of the July 8th deadline imposed by Trump on renegotiating America's tariffs on South Korea's foremost industrial goods. Now, that's likely going to top the summit's agenda. But many also expect the US will demand Seoul pays more towards security to cover areas outside their existing cost-sharing agreement, such as the deployment of US strategic assets. Another issue could possibly be North Korea, of course, as Yi moves to lower tensions and Trump signals interest in resuming dialogue with the North.
And there is also a question mark over whether President Yi will accept an invitation from the Chinese government to attend a major military parade, right?
That's right, Unji. The September 3rd celebration is going to be a massive military parade in Beijing's Tiananmen Square, and the numerical significance of 80 years marking a new decade will make the event itself all the more meaningful. The 70th anniversary event in 2015 was attended by then South Korean President Park Geun-hye. But of course, this may raise eyebrows in Washington amid its strategic rivalry with Beijing. So, as a presidential official in Seoul said on Wednesday, it is a rather difficult decision to make. But with the Yi administration seeking pragmatism, and as South Korea will host both the US and China this year at the APEC summit in Gyeongju, some experts say that Seoul should show courtesy to all sides.
It's ideal if Trump goes too. If both attend, so much the better. But if Trump declines, then Korea has to decide. There's still time, so we need careful thought. The celebration only happens once in about 10 years. Personally, I believe Korea should take a bold approach and take up that opportunity to improve Korea-China relations in preparation for APEC.
If Yi is able to hold a summit with Trump first, and possibly with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, then this could clear clear the path for him to travel to Beijing afterwards. And according to my sources, talks are ongoing with Japan to resume the so-called shuttle of leaders between Seoul and Tokyo.
All right, Soo-young, let's see what happens later this month. Thank you for that report today.
Thanks for having me, Inji.
A brutal heat wave is gripping South Korea. Heat wave advisories were issued in most regions, with the daytime temperature reaching up to 37 degrees in some parts of the country this week. Dozens of people headed to the emergency room due to heat-related illnesses. Seoul City saw the season's first heat wave advisory being issued on Monday, just a day after it experienced its first tropical night of the summer. With the scorching heat expected to last for the time being, the country's weather agency is now advising vulnerable groups, including the elderly and children, to take extra care to stay hydrated and limit outdoor activities. With U.S. President Donald Trump saying the grace period on tariffs won't be extended, South Korea and its industries are moving faster than ever to resolve the issues they face. What industry is the most exposed right now, and what can Seoul use as leverage in negotiations with the United States? Our Kim Do-yeon asked the experts.
The stakes couldn't be higher as South Korea's heavy dependence on exports, especially to the United States, leaves its core industries vulnerable. With the July 8th deadline fast approaching, Seoul is racing to secure a deal that shields its automakers and semiconductor producers from hefty new tariffs.
I believe Korea needs to emphasize that its economic growth leads to more factories and jobs being created in the United States, and use that to steer negotiations in a direction that benefits both countries.
Recent moves by Hyundai Motor Group underscore that point, with the company pledging over $21 billion in investments across the U.S. over the next 3 years. The move perhaps testifies to experts' claims that autos are the most exposed. Under Section 232 of the U.S. Trade Expansion Act, Washington currently slaps a 25% tariff on imported vehicles and auto parts, a duty both Korea and Japan have been pushing to reduce.
Among all the tariffs Korea faces from the U.S. right now, the most critical issue is the auto sector. If this isn't resolved, we're likely to see significant damage, not just for finished cars, but also for parts, steel, and aluminum, since all these tariffs are heavily concentrated on automobiles.
Without a breakthrough, Korea's automakers and a web of suppliers could suffer severe losses. Some experts suggest that ramping up local manufacturing in the U.S. may be the most immediate way to cushion the blow.
By using production facilities over there, we can effectively offset tariffs on parts as well. So at this point, I think expanding and maximizing manufacturing operations in the U.S., rather than producing everything domestically, is actually the best alternative we have.
But they caution this could mean fewer jobs and contracts for Korea's own factories and parts makers. That's why experts say tariffs will ultimately need to be tackled at the negotiating table. They point out that South Korea's shipbuilding capacity could serve as leverage, while even adjustments to defense cost-sharing might come into play. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And addressing concerns on Trump's tariff threats, the South Korean government on Monday hosted a public hearing to seek Seoul's potential negotiation strategy. Our economic correspondent Park Jun-an was there.
South Korea may face a 0.3 to 0.4% decline in real GDP if tariff effects are fully felt. This was mentioned during a public hearing held by the Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy on Monday, based on a feasibility review conducted by the Korea Institute for International Economic Policy.
If all the tariffs imposed or planned by the Trump administration were to materialize, our projections estimated that real GDP growth could decline by approximately 0.3% to 0.4%.
The hearing was held a day after trade ministry officials from the new Lee Jae-myung administration returned from high-level tariff negotiations in the United States last week. The talks involved 6 areas of trade between South Korea and the U.S., namely balanced trade, non-tariff measures, economic security, digital trade, country of origin, and commercial considerations. People from various sectors, including agriculture, steel, automobiles, and oil, gathered to express complaints and called for transparent disclosure of progress in the negotiations. While the Trade Ministry expressed sympathy to industries affected by the tariffs, it explained that only limited information could be shared, as the potential harm of disclosing the details of the negotiations outweighs the benefits.
If you look at global or domestic media, there's very little information on which countries specifically received what demands and how they responded to certain tariff-related issues. I believe this is due to concerns over transparency, as making the negotiations public could be detrimental to the national interest.
The Trade Ministry will soon report to the National Assembly on the treaty signing plan following the public hearing, in accordance with Article 6 of the Commerce Treaty Act, which mandates the formulation and reporting of plans for concluding commerce treaties. Although the pace of negotiations is likely to pick up, it's still unclear when a deal will be reached or what kind of tariffs might follow. With less than 10 days left before the July 9th deadline, the tug-of-war between South Korea and the U.S. is expected to continue. Park Junan, Arirang News.
North Korea has taken the unusual step of publicly honoring troops killed while fighting alongside Russian forces against Ukraine, revealing images never before shown to its residents. Our North Korean affairs correspondent Kim Jung-sil reports.
In a rare public display, North Korean state media aired images of its troops deployed to Russia's Kursk region. Marking the first anniversary of a new military pact with Moscow, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un watched the performance in Pyongyang, sitting with his daughter Chue as Russia's culture minister Olga Lyubimova sat at the table next to him. Large screens showed photos of North Korean soldiers in combat, as well as images of Kim pausing before flag-draped coffins, scenes never before shown to the public. After a Russian ensemble performed, North Korean artists offered songs apparently dedicated to fallen soldiers, and Kim stood during the tribute song. State cameras captured audience members wiping away tears as Kim was seen kneeling by the coffins, his hands resting on the flags covering them. State media also revealed, for the first time, Kim's handwritten order authorizing the Kursk offensive. Analysts say Pyongyang is using the ceremony to honor the fallen, rally public support, and reinforce its growing alliance with Moscow. Officials in Seoul believe the display may also be intended to sustain morale ahead of possible additional deployments and to remind Russia that these sacrifices come with the expectation of compensation. Observers also noted the deliberate staging of Kim's daughter, who has appeared more frequently at Russia-related events since she visited the Russian embassy in May, as part of efforts to present her as a potential successor. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
President Lee Jae-myung invited leading cultural figures to his office today to hear their voices on ways to support them and promote Korea as a global cultural powerhouse. There, he called for the need to significantly expand support for artists. Our correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
A power that is soft but strong. The message was prominent as President Lee Jae-myung hosted leading figures in the cultural sector at the presidential office on Monday, given the impact of culture on the economy and beyond borders.
폭삭 속았수다를 보면서 이거를 하나의 산업으로 키워서 대한민국이 전 세계에 이렇게 딱 드러날 수 있는 결정적인 계기가 될 수도 있겠다 이 생각이 그때 들었습니다. 전 세계로 좀 진출해서 대한민국의 문화적 영향력을 키우면 우리가 세계적인 강국으로 선도국가.
For that, he urged the need to significantly increase investment and support for the culture industry. Along with First Lady Kim Hae-kyung, among those invited were musical writer Park Chun-hyu, who wrote a Tony Award-winning Maybe Happy Ending, renowned soprano Cho Soo-mi, and 16-year-old ballerino Ha Gyun-jae. Also present were Kim Won-seok, director of the Netflix hit drama When Life Gives You Tangerines, and Ha Ga-young, who recently won first prize in the La Cinef section at the Cannes for her short film First Summer.
As for the performance industry, we need more exchanges with local experts overseas. I ask for policies to help invite overseas experts here for cooperation, or artists here going abroad.
The roundtable focused on hearing from artists themselves, as the president often emphasizes the need to listen to voices on the ground to devise tailored policies from their point of view, though he did pitch his suggestion based on his administrative experience as a governor.
사실 우리 사회 전체의 수준을 높이기 위한 일종의 투자다 이렇게 생각을 좀 해줘야 될 것 같아서 제가 이제 문화예술인 기본소득 같은 걸 도입하자.
This is in line with Lee's pledges in his inaugural speech when he vowed to make Korea one of the top 5 cultural powerhouses in the world, as he quoted a famous phrase by independence activist Kim Gu, who wished for the power of a high culture.
The meeting took place amid growing recognition of Korean culture on the global stage. What lies ahead is how to materialize what's been discussed to actually support artists. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
This week, Seoul isn't just Korea's capital city, it's a K-drama set. From filming spots to fan events, visitors are living out their favorite scenes. Park Hyo-bin takes us there.
Tourists are stepping into Squid Game. They're not just watching the show. They're playing the games, walking the sets, and reliving scenes in the very heart of Seoul.
Festival was excellent, and I take part in this game, and I win it. So I got some prize. I really enjoy it.
You know, one day she just found the tickets, and we just said, "Hey, let's go!" And we couldn't pass it up because it's such an iconic film from Netflix, and we're.
Here at the Gwanghwamun Square, tourists are diving into the world of Squid Games as they're playing games that were featured in the series.
This interactive experience is part of the 2025 K-Content Seoul Travel Week, a collaborative event hosted by the city of Seoul and global streaming giant Netflix. Alongside the game zone, visitors can stop by the Seoul Spot travel booth, which features exhibitions from 10 Netflix K-dramas and travel guides to nearby filming locations and restaurants. Also drawing crowds is the Seoul Spot Dorsen Tour, a guided walk through real-life filming spots led by actors themselves. They visited several filming locations from Squid Game, including Tapgul Park and Jonggak Station.
We had participants from so many countries, and some even understood the drama better than I did. But what impressed me most was their heartfelt love and passion for Korean culture.
The event, which runs till July 6th, kicked off with a bang last Saturday, featuring a massive Squid Game Season 3 finale celebration. Performers in the show's signature costumes marched from Gwanghwamun to Seoul Plaza, transforming the streets into a surreal K-drama parade. Fiction and reality blend together in the streets of Seoul, inviting fans not just to watch the story, but to step right into it. Park Hyo-bin, Arirang News.
That is all we have for this edition of Weekly News Highlights. Thank you for watching.